Tonight, as you settle into this moment, I want you to know something important. You do not need to fix yourself. You do not need to become wiser, calmer, or more enlightened before you are allowed to rest. You are enough, exactly as you are. And the peace you have been searching for has been waiting here all along, patient and unchanging, like the sky behind the clouds. We will walk together through life-changing Zen tales that have transformed hearts for over 1,000 years. Stories so simple they seem almost ordinary, yet so profound they have awakened countless people to a completely different way of living. These are not fairy tales about distant masters or impossible achievements. They are stories about people like you and me who discovered that the secret to freedom was not in acquiring something new, but in seeing clearly what had always been true. We will explore teachings about letting go, about being present, about finding the extraordinary in the ordinary, about waking up to the life that is happening right here, right now. Welcome to Sleepy Monk. Before we begin, if you feel called to, share where in the world you are listening from tonight. Are you in the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, somewhere else entirely? Knowing that we are walking this path together, people from all corners of the earth seeking the same peace, can be deeply comforting. This is your refuge, a space where nothing is demanded of you, where you can simply be exactly as you are. If this resonates with something quiet within you, I invite you to subscribe and return whenever you need to remember the wisdom that lives in stillness. For now, just breathe. Let everything soften. Let us begin. Our first story takes us to a monastery where a young monk named Kenzo had been practicing with burning determination. He had come to the monastery 7 years earlier with a singular goal: enlightenment. He had read about the great masters who had achieved liberation, about the profound peace that comes from awakening, and he wanted this more than anything he had ever wanted in his life. Kenzo meditated for hours each day until his legs went numb and his back ached. He studied sacred texts late into the night, memorizing teachings, analyzing koans, trying to understand the secret that would unlock the door to awakening. He questioned every teacher, attended every talk, pushed himself relentlessly toward his goal. Other monks admired his dedication. They saw his fierce commitment and his refusal to be distracted by comfort or ease. But they also noticed something else. Despite all his practice, Kenzo seemed more agitated, not less, more desperate, not more peaceful, more lost, not more found. The harder he tried to grasp enlightenment, the more exhausted and frustrated he became. One autumn morning, when the air was crisp and the leaves were turning gold, Kenzo was assigned to work in the monastery garden alongside an old monk named Hakuin. Hakuin was not famous. He had never given Dharma talks or written treatises. He spent his days doing simple work, tending the garden, sweeping paths, preparing meals, mending clothes. He had been at the monastery for over 50 years, and while others came seeking his wisdom, he never presented himself as having any special understanding. He was simply present, fully engaged with whatever task was in front of him, moving through his days with a quality of ease that Kenzo found both compelling and frustrating. As they worked together in silence, pulling weeds from between the vegetables, Kenzo's frustration finally erupted. He could no longer contain the desperation that had been building in him for years. "Master Hakuin," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "I have been practicing for 7 years. 7 years of meditation, study, dedication. I have sacrificed everything for this path. I barely sleep because I am always practicing. I push through pain and exhaustion. I give everything I have. And yet I feel no closer to enlightenment than the day I walked through the monastery gates. In fact, I feel further away, more confused, more lost. What am I doing wrong? What am I missing? Please, I am begging you, tell me what I need to do." Hakuin continued pulling weeds, his weathered hands moving with patient precision, completely absorbed in the simple task. The silence stretched out, and Kenzo wondered if the old monk had even heard him. Finally, without looking up from his work, Hakuin said quietly, "You are seeking enlightenment. That is your problem." Kenzo felt a flash of anger surge through him. After pouring out his heart, after revealing his deepest frustration, this was the answer. "But isn't that the entire point?" he said, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "Isn't that why we are all here? Isn't seeking enlightenment what Zen practice is about?" Hakuin sat back on his heels and finally looked at Kenzo, his eyes holding a depth of compassion that immediately softened Kenzo's anger. "Tell me something, Kenzo. What is in your hand right now, in this moment?" Kenzo looked down at the weed he was holding, confused by the question. "A weed. I am holding a weed. And a moment ago, when you were pulling that weed, when your attention was completely absorbed in the act of grasping the stem, feeling for the root, pulling it free from the soil, where was your mind that is always seeking enlightenment? Where was your desperate need to become awakened?" Kenzo paused, genuinely considering the question. He realized with a shock that for those brief moments when he was completely engaged in pulling the weed, his seeking mind had been completely absent. There had been no thoughts of enlightenment, no measuring his progress, no anxiety about whether he was doing it right. There had been only the act itself, the sensation of the stem in his fingers, the subtle resistance of roots clinging to earth, the small sound of soil releasing its hold. Just simple, complete, unmediated presence. "It was quiet," Kenzo said slowly. "My mind was quiet." Hakuin nodded, a gentle smile crossing his weathered face. "In that moment, you were not seeking anything. You were simply here, doing what you were doing, being what you are. And tell me, in that moment of pure presence, were you suffering? Were you agitated? Were you lost?" "No," Kenzo admitted. "I was just there, just pulling the weed." "This is the great paradox at the heart of Zen," Hakuin said, returning his attention to the garden, his hands resuming their patient work. "Seeking enlightenment is itself the primary obstacle to enlightenment. The very act of seeking creates a split in your being. It creates a you now who is insufficient, incomplete, unenlightened, and a you in the future who will finally be enough, who will finally have achieved what you lack. This split is violence against your own nature. It makes this moment not enough. It makes you not enough. It turns your entire life into a constant, exhausting striving towards something else, somewhere else, some other time." He pulled another weed, examined its roots, set it aside on the pile. "But enlightenment is not somewhere else. It is here. It is not some other time. It is now. It is not a state you achieve in the future after sufficient practice and purification. It is the simple, direct awareness that is already here, already looking through your eyes, already experiencing this moment, already completely present." Kenzo felt something beginning to crack open inside him, something that had been clenched tight for 7 years. "But if enlightenment is already here, why do I not experience it? Why do I feel so far from peace?" "Because you are seeking it," Hakuin replied simply. "Because you are looking for something other than what is actually here. It is like searching everywhere for your glasses while they are on your face. The searching itself prevents you from seeing what is already present. Every moment you spend seeking enlightenment is a moment you are not present to the enlightenment that is here." He gestured to the garden around them, to the morning light filtering through the trees, to the sound of birds and the scent of earth. This moment, exactly as it is the Buddha's teaching. This breath, this sensation, this simple act of being alive and aware, this is what you have been seeking. Not some mystical experience, not some dramatic transformation where suddenly you become a different person. Just this, the direct, unfiltered experience of being here, now, without the constant commentary of the seeking mind. Kenzo felt tears beginning to well in his eyes, though he could not have said exactly why. Perhaps it was relief, perhaps it was grief for the 7 years he had spent fighting against himself, demanding that he be different, better, more. Perhaps it was simply the exhaustion of finally setting down a burden he had been carrying for so long. "So what should I do?" he asked quietly. "If seeking is the problem, what is the practice?" Hakuin smiled again, that smile that held infinite patience and kindness. "Stop seeking, just be here. When you sit in meditation, do not sit trying to achieve enlightenment. Sit, just sit. When you walk, do not walk towards some imagined destination of awakening. Walk, just walk. When you eat, eat. When you work in the garden, work in the garden. Be completely, utterly present to what you are actually doing, not to some fantasy of what you think you should be doing or where you think you should be getting." He paused, looking directly into Kenzo's eyes. "This does not mean you stop practicing. You continue to sit, to study, to work, to engage with the teachings, but you do it from presence, not from lack, from fullness, not from seeking, from the recognition that you are already complete, already whole, already home. The practice is not to get somewhere you are not. The practice is to wake up to where you already are." That day marked a turning point in Kenzo's practice. He did not suddenly become enlightened in some dramatic fashion. There were no fireworks, no mystical visions, no sense of achieving something he had previously lacked. But something fundamental shifted. He stopped dividing his experience into now, which is insufficient, and later, when I will finally be enlightened. He began to meet each moment as complete in itself. When he sat in meditation, he sat, not trying to get anywhere, not measuring his progress, just sitting with complete attention to the simple reality of sitting. When thoughts arose, he noticed them and returned to his breath. Not because returning to his breath would make him enlightened, but simply because that was the practice in that moment. The agitation that had characterized his first 7 years began to dissolve, not because he had achieved anything, but because he had stopped creating agitation through his constant seeking. The peace he had been desperately grasping for revealed itself to have been here all along, waiting patiently beneath the storm of his striving. He discovered that enlightenment was not a destination to reach, but a way of being with what is already here. Not later, not elsewhere. Here, now. This teaching about non-seeking is one of the most profound and most misunderstood teachings in all of Zen. It does not mean we become passive or lazy, that we stop caring about growth or development. It means we stop creating suffering through the constant demand that we be somewhere other than where we are. We continue to practice, to learn, to grow, but we do it from a foundation of already being enough, rather than from a desperate sense of lack. We move forward not because we are running away from what we are, but because growth is the natural expression of being fully alive. When we stop seeking and start being present, we discover that the peace we were looking for was never absent. We were just too busy looking for it to notice it was here. As you rest here now, breathing in and breathing out, can you feel what it is like to not be seeking anything? Not seeking sleep, not seeking peace, not seeking to be anywhere other than exactly where you are. Just being here, in this body, in this breath, in this moment. This is not a practice to achieve something. This is simply what it feels like to stop fighting with reality, to stop demanding that this moment be different, to finally arrive where you have always been. In another monastery, far to the south, there lived a young woman named Ren, who had come to study Zen with a similar burning intensity. She was brilliant and dedicated, quickly mastering the teachings, impressing her teachers with her understanding of complex philosophical concepts. She could discuss emptiness and Buddha nature with eloquence. She could explain the subtleties of different schools of thought. She knew the sutras by heart and could quote them in response to any question. But her teacher, an old nun named Sato, watched Ren with concern. For all her knowledge, Ren did not seem peaceful. She carried her understanding like armor, using it to defend against the vulnerability of not knowing, to maintain control over the messy reality of actual experience. She lived in her head, in concepts and theories, protected from the raw immediacy of life. One day, Sato asked Ren to go to the village and purchase vegetables for the monastery. It was a simple errand, the kind of mundane task that was usually given to newer students. Ren felt slightly offended. She was one of the senior students, accomplished in her studies, and here she was being sent to buy vegetables like a novice. But she went, dutiful if resentful. In the village market, Ren found the vegetable seller, an old woman with hands gnarled from a lifetime of farming. As Ren was selecting vegetables, trying to complete the task as quickly as possible so she could return to her important studies, the old woman smiled at her and said, "You have the look of someone carrying something heavy. Would you like to rest here for a moment?" Ren was taken aback. She was about to offer a polite refusal when something in the old woman's eyes, a quality of genuine warmth and lack of judgment, made her pause. She found herself sitting on the small stool the woman offered, surrounded by the smell of earth and green things, the sounds of the market flowing around her. The old woman continued her work, arranging vegetables, speaking with customers, moving with an ease and presence that Ren recognized but could not name. After some time, the woman said without looking at Ren, "I have never been to a monastery. I cannot read the sacred texts. I do not know the teachings of the great masters, but I know vegetables. I know how a radish grows, how it needs cool weather and loose soil, how you can feel in your hands when it is ready to harvest. I know how to arrange them so people can see their beauty. I know how to price them fairly, so both buyer and seller are content. This is what I know. This is my practice." She turned to look at Ren, her weathered face holding a depth that all of Ren's studying had not prepared her for. "And in knowing vegetables this way, completely, with my whole being, I know something of life itself. The way things grow in their own time, the way beauty is simple and right in front of us, the way each thing has its season. You study great teachings, this is good, but are you living them? Or are you collecting them like I collect vegetables, something external to carry around?" Ren felt as if she had been struck. This illiterate old woman who knew nothing of Buddhism had just expressed something more profound than all the sutras Ren had memorized. She had pointed directly at the split in Ren's practice, the way she had been using knowledge as a substitute for actual transformation, understanding as a defense against real engagement with life. When Ren returned to the monastery, she went immediately to Sato and told her about the encounter. Sato smiled knowingly. "The old vegetable seller is your true teacher today," she said. "She has shown you the difference between knowing about life and actually living. You can quote the Diamond Sutra perfectly, but do you know the feel of rain on your skin the way she knows the feel of a ripe radish? You can explain emptiness, but do you experience it in the simple act of washing dishes or walking in the garden? You have been treating Zen as information to acquire, rather than as a way to be." Sato continued, "There is nothing wrong with study. There is nothing wrong with understanding the teachings intellectually. But if that understanding does not transform how you actually move through the world, how you wash a bowl, how you speak to a stranger, how you meet this very moment, then it is just decoration. Beautiful perhaps, but ultimately lifeless." She poured tea for both of them, the simple act done with complete attention. The old woman at the market has probably never heard the word mindfulness, but she lives it in every interaction with her vegetables. You have heard 1,000 teachings about being present, but how often are you actually here, fully engaged with what is right in front of you? You know all about non-attachment intellectually, but are you attached to your knowledge, to your identity as someone who understands, to your position as an accomplished student? Ren sat in silence, feeling the weight of these questions. Everything Sato was saying was true. She had been hiding in her knowledge, using it to avoid the vulnerability of actual presence, the uncertainty of not knowing, the humility required to meet life directly without the buffer of concepts. She had memorized teachings about emptiness, but had not allowed herself to be empty. She had studied teachings about letting go, but was gripping tightly to her intellectual understanding as if it were solid ground. "What should I do?" Ren asked, her voice small, stripped of its usual confident tone. "Live," Sato replied simply. Practice with your whole being, not just your mind. When you wash a bowl, wash it with the same complete attention the vegetable seller brings to her radishes. When you sit in meditation, do not sit reviewing what you know about meditation. Sit. When you walk, do not walk thinking about the teachings on walking meditation. Walk. Feel your feet on the earth. Feel the air on your skin. Be the direct experience instead of the one thinking about the experience. She paused, letting her words settle. And practice not knowing. This might be the hardest thing for you. You have built an identity around knowing, around understanding, around being the one who has the answers. Practice saying, I do not know. Practice meeting moments without immediately categorizing them according to your learned frameworks. Practice the beginner's mind that sees everything fresh, as if for the first time, without the dead weight of all your accumulated knowledge. In the months that followed, Ren's practice transformed completely. She did not abandon her studies, but she stopped treating them as the primary practice. Instead, she brought full attention to the simple activities of monastery life. Washing bowls became a meditation more profound than any sitting session where she had been lost in thought about profound concepts. Sweeping the courtyard taught her about impermanence and acceptance in a way that reading about these concepts never had. Working in the garden, feeling the soil, watching things grow and die and grow again, gave her a visceral understanding of the cycle of existence that no sutra could convey. She began to notice how often her mind wanted to narrate her experience, to understand it, to fit it into her framework of knowledge, and she practiced gently setting aside that tendency, over and over, returning to direct experience. Not the thought about walking, but the actual sensation of walking. Not the concept of taste, but the actual taste of tea. Not the idea of breath, but the actual feeling of air moving in and out of her body. Something remarkable happened. As Ren stopped living in her head and began living in direct experience, she became more genuinely helpful to others. Before, when people came to her with questions, she would give them technically correct answers from her vast knowledge, but these answers often felt cold, detached, more about displaying her understanding than truly meeting the person in front of her. Now, she could meet people where they actually were, respond to what they truly needed rather than what the textbook said they should need. Her wisdom became warm, accessible, human. One day, years later, Ren was working in the market during the monastery's regular service day, and she encountered the old vegetable seller again. The woman was now very elderly, moving slowly, but still present to her work. When she saw Ren, her face lit up with recognition. "You came back," she said simply, "and you have changed. You are here now. Before, you were somewhere else, thinking about somewhere else. Now you are here." Ren bowed deeply, feeling tears spring to her eyes. "You were my teacher," she said. "You showed me that Zen is not about what you know, but about how you live. Thank you." The old woman laughed, a sound like bells. "I showed you nothing. You saw for yourself. That is the only real teaching, the one you see for yourself through your own direct experience. Everything else is just pointing at the moon. You finally stopped staring at the finger and looked at the moon itself." This teaching about the difference between intellectual understanding and embodied wisdom is crucial for anyone walking a spiritual path. We can read every book, attend every teaching, memorize every sutra, and still miss the point entirely if we treat the teachings as information to collect rather than as invitations to transform how we actually live. The purpose of Zen teachings is not to make you knowledgeable, but to make you free. And freedom comes not from understanding concepts about freedom, but from directly experiencing the liberation that is available when you are fully present to life as it actually is. As you rest here, breathing naturally, notice if there is a difference between thinking about resting and actually resting, between the concept of peace and the direct experience of peace. You do not need to understand peace. You do not need to know things about peace. You can simply be peace. Simply rest in the direct experience of this moment. this breath, this sensation of your body settling into stillness. This is not something to understand. This is something to be. In a monastery nestled between mountains, there was a monk named Takashi, who was known for his hot temper. Small frustrations would set him off. When the meditation hall was too cold, he would complain bitterly. When his meals were not to his liking, he would criticize the kitchen workers. When other monks made noise during silent periods, he would glare at them with barely contained rage. He knew his anger was a problem. He had studied all the teachings about patience and equanimity. He could explain perfectly why anger was harmful, how it arose from attachment and aversion, how it created suffering for himself and others. But understanding the teachings about anger did nothing to stop the anger from arising. If anything, knowing he should not be angry made him even more frustrated when anger came, adding a layer of self-judgment to the original irritation. One winter, a traveling monk named Daishin came to stay at the monastery. Daishin was very old, his back bent, his movements slow. He had practiced for over 60 years, and though he held no official position, people sensed something profound in his presence. There was a quality of unshakable peace about him, as if nothing could disturb the deep stillness he carried. Takashi watched Daishin carefully, looking for some sign of what made him so peaceful. He noticed that Daishin never seemed irritated or frustrated, even when circumstances were difficult. When the meditation hall was freezing, Daishin sat without complaint. When the food was bland or cold, he ate with apparent contentment. When disruptions occurred, he simply returned to his practice without any visible annoyance. One evening, after a particularly difficult day where everything had seemed to go wrong and Takashi's anger had been triggered repeatedly, he approached Daishin and asked directly, "Teacher, how do you remain so peaceful? I watch you and you never seem angry, never frustrated, never bothered by anything. What is your secret? What practice do you do to eliminate anger?" Daishin looked at Takashi with eyes that held infinite kindness and said something that shocked him completely. "I do not eliminate anger. Anger still arises in me." Takashi was confused. "But I have never seen you angry. I have never seen you even slightly irritated." "That is because when anger arises, I do not add anything to it," Daishin replied. "I do not add the story that I should not be angry. I do not add the judgment that anger means I am a bad practitioner. I do not add the belief that something is wrong with me for feeling this way. I simply feel the anger as it is, raw and direct, without the layers of story and judgment that turn a simple arising emotion into prolonged suffering." He gestured for Takashi to sit with him. "Let me explain. When something happens that your system finds unpleasant, the cold, the bad food, the disruption, the body responds with a cascade of sensations. Heat rising, tension forming, energy mobilizing. This is not a problem. This is just the body's natural response to perceived threat or discomfort. We call this anger when it reaches a certain intensity. But the anger itself, the raw sensation, lasts perhaps 10, maybe 20 seconds if we do not feed it." Daishin held up his hand. "But what do we usually do? The sensation arises, and immediately the mind jumps in. This is unfair. This should not be happening. People are so inconsiderate. I have every right to be angry. If only things were different, I would not feel this way." And with each of these thoughts, we throw fuel on the fire. We take a brief arising of uncomfortable sensation and turn it into a raging storm that can last for hours, days, even years. Takashi listened intently, recognizing himself in this description. His anger never lasted just a few seconds. It would build and build as he replayed the offense, justified his irritation, imagined confrontations, rehearsed grievances. "So what do you do differently?" Takashi asked. "When anger arises, I feel it completely," Daishin said. "I notice the heat in my chest. I notice the tension in my jaw and shoulders. I notice the energy that wants to mobilize. I acknowledge, anger is here. But I do not believe the stories Buddhic, My mind wants to tell about the anger. I do not justify it. I do not judge it. I do not feed it with thoughts about how things should be different. I simply feel the raw sensation, which is actually quite interesting if you meet it with curiosity rather than resistance. He paused, letting this sink in. And here is what I have discovered. When you feel anger this way, without adding fuel, it moves through you quickly, like a wave. It arises, it peaks, it passes. In its wake, you might still need to address the situation that triggered it. You might need to communicate a boundary or solve a problem. But you can do this from clarity rather than from the distorted perception that comes when you are lost in the stories anger tells. Takashi began to practice what Daishin had taught. At first, it was extremely difficult. His habitual pattern was so strong. When anger arose, his mind would immediately leap to justification and storytelling. But he practiced catching himself, noticing when the mind was adding fuel to the fire, and gently returning to the direct sensation of anger in his body, without the story. The first few times he tried this, he was amazed at what he discovered. The raw sensation of anger, without all the mental elaboration, was not nearly as overwhelming as he had thought. It was intense, yes, but it was also temporary. When he stopped feeding it with thoughts, it would arise, crest like a wave, and then naturally subside, usually within 30 seconds to a minute. But more than that, he began to notice something else. Beneath the anger, there was often something more vulnerable. Sometimes it was fear, sometimes it was hurt, sometimes it was simply exhaustion or hunger or physical discomfort. The anger was like a protective layer over something more tender. When he could be present with the anger without feeding it, he could also sense what lay beneath it, and often what lay beneath needed something different than what anger wanted to do. One day, several months into this practice, Takashi was in the meditation hall when a young monk came in late, making considerable noise as he tried to quietly find his seat. The old Takashi would have been consumed with righteous anger, glaring at the young monk, stewing in irritation for the rest of the sitting period, perhaps even confronting him afterward. But this time, Takashi noticed the anger arise, the heat, the tension, the critical thoughts beginning to form, and he simply felt it. The sensation moved through him like a wave and passed. And in the space that opened up after it passed, he could see the young monk more clearly. He saw someone who was probably embarrassed about being late, who was trying his best to be quiet, who was just another person struggling to practice, just like Takashi himself. After the sitting, Takashi approached the young monk, who immediately began to apologize. But instead of the lecture the young monk was clearly expecting, Takashi simply said, "It happens. The path is not about being perfect. It is about showing up, again and again, even when we are late, even when we make noise. I am glad you came." The young monk looked stunned, and Takashi walked away feeling something he had rarely experienced before: lightness. He had not suppressed his anger. He had not forced himself to be kind through gritted teeth. He had simply allowed the anger to be what it was, a temporary arising, and in the space that opened up when it passed, natural compassion had emerged. Over time, Takashi's entire demeanor changed. He did not become someone who never felt anger. Anger still arose, but he was no longer controlled by it, no longer lost in its stories, no longer creating suffering for himself and others by feeding it endlessly. People began to notice the change. Where once he had been tense and irritable, now he carried a quality of ease. Where once he had been quick to criticize, now he was quick to understand. Before Daishin left the monastery, Takashi thanked him deeply. "You have given me freedom," he said. "Not freedom from anger, but freedom from being enslaved by anger." Daishin smiled. "You gave yourself that freedom. I only pointed at something you discovered through your own practice. This is the only way real change happens, not through understanding concepts about change, but through directly practicing a new way of meeting your experience, again and again, until it becomes natural." This teaching about working with difficult emotions is one of the most practical and life-changing teachings in Zen. We often think the goal is to eliminate difficult emotions, to become someone who never feels anger or fear or sadness. But this is not the path. The path is learning to feel these emotions fully without being controlled by them, without adding layers of story and judgment that turn brief arising sensations into prolonged suffering. When we can feel anger without the story about anger, when we can feel fear without the story about fear, these emotions move through us naturally, like weather passing through the sky. They still arise, this is part of being human, but they no longer define us, control us, or create unnecessary suffering. As you lie here breathing, can you notice if there is any emotion present right now? Perhaps anxiety about not sleeping, perhaps frustration with the day that passed, perhaps worry about tomorrow. Can you practice what Daishin taught? Simply feel the sensation of the emotion in your body without adding the story about why you feel this way, what it means, whether you should or should not feel it. Just the raw sensation. Notice how it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Notice how it is always changing. This is not suppressing emotion. This is meeting emotion with clear awareness rather than getting lost in the stories emotions tell. In a small village at the edge of a great forest, there lived a woodcarver named Hideo, who was renowned throughout the region for his exquisite work. He could carve animals so lifelike they seemed ready to leap from the wood. His Buddha statues were said to emanate peace. His decorative screens were sought by wealthy families for their beauty and craftsmanship. Hideo took great pride in his skill. His identity was completely wrapped up in being a master craftsman, in creating perfect works, in receiving recognition for his artistry. But as Hideo grew older, his hands began to shake slightly. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. But for someone whose entire sense of worth was built on the precision of his carving, even the smallest tremor was devastating. He tried to hide it, tried to work through it, but the shaking gradually worsened. His carvings began to show imperfections he could not control. Lines that should have been smooth became slightly jagged. Details that required precise control became blurred. Hideo fell into despair. If he could not carve perfectly, who was he? His entire life had been built on this skill. Without it, what value did he have? What was his purpose? He stopped taking commissions, stopped working altogether. He would sit in his workshop surrounded by half-finished pieces and feel a grief so profound it was like drowning. One day, a Zen master named Teshu was passing through the village and heard about Hideo's situation. He came to visit the woodcarver in his workshop. Hideo was reluctant to receive visitors, ashamed of his condition, but something about the old master's gentle insistence made him open the door. Teshu looked around the workshop at the beautiful carvings, the tools arranged with precision, the half-finished pieces gathering dust. "Show me your hands," he said simply. Hideo held out his hands, and they trembled visibly. He felt shame wash over him. "These hands betrayed me," he said bitterly. "They were everything, and now they are useless." Teshu took Hideo's shaking hands in his own steady ones and held them gently. "These hands have not betrayed you. They are simply changing. Everything changes. This is the nature of all things. Your hands were once a child's hands, small and clumsy. Then they became a young man's hands, strong and precise. Now they are becoming an old man's hands. They have not betrayed you. They are simply being what hands are in this season of your life." He released Hideo's hands and walked to one of the finished carvings, a Buddha statue with perfectly smooth lines and exquisite detail. "This is beautiful," Teshu said. "But it is also cold. It is so perfect it feels distant, untouchable. It does not show the human being who made it." He picked up one of the half-finished pieces, one where Hideo's tremor had created slightly irregular lines. "This," Teshu said, "has warmth. It has humanity. It shows the vulnerability of the maker. It tells a truth that the perfect pieces cannot tell, that beauty and imperfection are not opposites. that the marks of our humanness are not flaws to hide, but qualities that make art authentic. Hideo felt anger rising. "You are patronizing me. You are telling me my weakness is actually strength. My failure is actually success. This is just a way to make me feel better about losing my ability." Teshu shook his head. "I am not patronizing you. I am pointing at a truth you cannot see, because you have been so attached to one narrow definition of value. You have believed that your worth comes from perfect control, from technical mastery, from meeting an ideal of flawlessness. But this belief has been a prison. It has made you afraid of being human, afraid of change, afraid of anything that does not match your idea of perfection." He sat down on a workbench, gesturing for Hideo to join him. "Let me tell you a story. Many years ago, there was a potter who created vessels of such perfect symmetry that they were considered masterpieces. But one day his pottery wheel broke, and while waiting for it to be repaired, he tried making pots by hand. These pots were asymmetrical, irregular, marked by his fingerprints. He was embarrassed by them. But when he showed them to his teacher, the teacher said, 'These are the first pots you have made that show your heart. The perfect ones show only your skill.'" Teshu continued, "You have shown your skill for many years. You have proven your technical mastery. But now you have an opportunity to show something deeper, your humanity, your vulnerability, your acceptance of imperfection. If you can work with these shaking hands, not fighting them but accepting them, incorporating their natural movement into your art, you might create something more profound than anything you made when you had perfect control." Hideo sat in silence, feeling the truth of these words working their way into him. He had been so focused on what he had lost that he could not see what might be gained. He had been defining his work, his very self, so narrowly that there was no room for change, no room for growth, no room for the natural evolution of a human life. "But what if people reject my new work?" Hideo asked quietly. "What if they see the imperfection and judge it as lesser?" "Some will," Teshu said honestly. "Some people value only technical perfection, only flawless execution. But others will see something in your new work that touches them more deeply than perfection ever could. They will see the courage it takes to continue creating even when your hands shake. They will see the acceptance of human limitation. They will see authenticity, and whether they value it or not, you will have found a way to continue expressing yourself, to continue offering your gifts to the world, even as you age and change." He stood to leave, but turned back at the door. The real question is not whether others will accept your new work. The real question is whether you can accept yourself as you actually are, not as you once were, or as you wish you could be. Can you be an old man with shaking hands and still have worth? Can you create imperfect things and still have dignity? Can you let go of your attachment to one narrow version of yourself and discover that you are so much more than your perfect technique ever was? After Teshu left, Hideo sat for a long time in his workshop. Finally, he picked up a piece of wood and his carving knife. His hands shook as always, but instead of fighting the shake, instead of trying to force steadiness, he began to carve with the shake, letting it become part of the work. The lines that emerged were different from anything he had created before. They had a quality of movement, of life, of spontaneity. They were not perfect, but they were alive in a way his perfect carvings had never been. Over the following months, Hideo created a new body of work. Some pieces still bore traces of his old precision in certain areas, combined now with the natural movement of his trembling hands in others. Some pieces were entirely new in style, embracing asymmetry and irregularity as essential elements rather than flaws to be corrected. He carved with acceptance rather than resistance, with curiosity rather than shame. When he finally began showing his new work, reactions were mixed, exactly as Teshu had predicted. Some people preferred his older style and were disappointed by the change. They wanted the Hideo they had known, the master of technical perfection. But others were deeply moved by the new work. They saw in it something they had never seen in his perfect carvings, honesty, vulnerability, the beauty of imperfection, the courage to continue creating even when circumstances changed. One person who bought several of his new pieces said something that Hideo would remember for the rest of his life. "Your old work was admirable, but it did not touch my heart. It was too perfect, too distant. These new pieces, with their irregularities and their humanity, they speak to me. They remind me that beauty does not require perfection, that there is something precious in accepting what is rather than demanding what should be. When I look at these carvings, I feel less alone in my own imperfections." Hideo realized that Teshu had been right. He had not lost his ability to contribute, to create, to offer something valuable to the world. He had only lost one narrow version of himself, which had been limiting him in ways he had never recognized. His new work came from a deeper place, from acceptance rather than control, from embracing reality rather than fighting it. And paradoxically, in letting go of his attachment to perfection, he had become a better artist, one whose work touched people's hearts and not just their eyes. Years later, when Hideo was very old and his hands shook even more, he would tell young craftspeople who came to study with him, "Do not wait until circumstances force you to accept imperfection. Begin now practicing the art of working with what is, rather than demanding what should be. Begin now discovering that your limitations are not obstacles to creativity, but invitations to create in new ways, to discover capacities you did not know you had." The path of true mastery is not about achieving perfect control. It is about learning to create, to express, to give your gifts even as you change, even as you age, even as circumstances shift. This is the difference between a skill and a way. A skill requires specific conditions to function. A way adapts, flows, continues regardless of conditions, because it comes from something deeper than technique. This teaching about accepting change and finding value beyond perfection is essential for anyone seeking peace. We build our identities on conditions that are inherently temporary: youth, health, strength, beauty, skill, status, roles. And when these conditions change, as they inevitably must, we experience it as loss, as failure, as the end of our value. But Zen points to something deeper than any temporary condition. Your worth is not in your abilities. Your value is not in your youth or your health or your perfection. You are valuable simply because you exist, because you are here, because consciousness experiences itself through your particular form. When you understand this, really understand it in your bones, change becomes less terrifying. You can let go of versions of yourself that no longer fit without feeling like you are losing everything, because you know that what you truly are is not any specific version but the awareness that witnesses all versions, the consciousness that continues regardless of what form it takes. As you breathe here in the darkness, can you practice accepting yourself exactly as you are right now? Not as you were yesterday, not as you hope to be tomorrow, but as you actually are in this moment. With whatever aches or tensions are in your body, with whatever limitations you currently have, with whatever imperfections you carry, can you meet yourself with the same gentle acceptance that Teshu offered Hideo? This is not giving up on growth. This is the foundation from which real growth becomes possible. When we stop fighting what is, when we stop demanding that we be different before we can have worth, we discover a peace that is not dependent on conditions. We discover that we are already enough. In a monastery famous for its strict discipline, there was a young monk named Koji who took the rules very seriously. He woke at the prescribed time, meditated for the required hours, ate exactly what was served without preference, spoke only when permitted. He followed every regulation perfectly, believing that this strict adherence to form was the path to enlightenment. He looked down on monks who were less disciplined, who sometimes slept late, or who laughed during work periods, or who seemed to approach practice with less rigidity than he did. One day, a very old monk named Ryokan arrived at the monastery. Ryokan was famous throughout the region, though not for his discipline. He was known as the Fool, a monk who lived very simply in a small hut, wrote poetry, played with children, and seemed to follow no rules at all. Yet masters spoke of him with deep respect, and people sought his wisdom from far and wide. Koji was skeptical. How could someone so undisciplined, so apparently lacking in rigor, be considered a true practitioner? The abbot assigned Koji to attend to Ryokan during his visit, which Koji took as both an honor and a test. He was determined to show Ryokan what real practice looked like. That first morning, Koji woke at the prescribed time and went to wake Ryokan for morning meditation. But Ryokan was already awake, sitting by the window, watching the sunrise with complete absorption. He was not in the meditation hall. He was not sitting in proper posture. He was simply gazing at the dawn light with such presence that Koji found himself stopped in his tracks. "Should you not be in the meditation hall?" Koji finally asked, unable to keep the judgment from his voice. Ryokan turned to look at him, his old face creasing in a smile. But I am meditating. I am sitting with the dawn. Is this not practice?" Koji felt confused, but there is a schedule. Morning meditation is in the hall, sitting in proper posture, following the prescribed form. "And is the purpose of the schedule to follow the schedule?" Ryokan asked gently. "Or is the purpose of the schedule to support awakening? If I am already awake to this moment, already fully present to this experience of dawn breaking over the mountains, what would sitting in the hall add? Would it make this moment more sacred? Would it make me more present than I already am?" Koji had no answer. Everything in his training told him that Ryokan was wrong, that form mattered, that discipline was essential. But something in the old monk's presence contradicted this. There was a quality of freedom, of genuine peace, that Koji had not encountered in all his years of rigid practice. Throughout the day, Koji continued to be confused and somewhat scandalized by Ryokan's behavior. During the work period, while other monks labored in silence, Ryokan sang quietly to himself, clearly delighted by the simple task of sweeping leaves. During meals, while Koji ate with perfect mindfulness and no preferences, Ryokan openly expressed joy when he tasted something particularly good. During the rest period, instead of doing additional practice as Koji always did, Ryokan napped without any apparent guilt. That evening, Koji could not contain himself any longer. "Forgive me, Master Ryokan, but I do not understand. You do not follow the schedule. You do not maintain rigorous discipline. You seem to do whatever you feel like doing. How is this practice? How is this the path to enlightenment?" Ryokan set down the tea he had been drinking and looked at Koji with infinite kindness. "Tell me, Koji, why do you practice so hard? Why do you follow every rule so perfectly?" "To achieve enlightenment, of course," Koji replied, as if this were obvious. "And what is enlightenment?" Ryokan asked. Koji recited what he had been taught. "Enlightenment is freedom from suffering, liberation from the cycle of birth and death, the realization of one's true nature." "And do you feel free?" Ryokan asked quietly. The question hit Koji like a physical blow. He realized with sudden clarity that he did not feel free at all. He felt bound by rules, by schedules, by his constant measuring of his own performance and the performance of others. He felt imprisoned by his idea of what a good practitioner should be, what enlightenment should look like, what spiritual progress should feel like. Every moment was filtered through whether he was doing it right, whether he was achieving his goal, whether he was closer to or further from enlightenment. "No," Koji admitted quietly. "I do not feel free. I feel burdened." Ryokan nodded. "This is because you have confused the finger pointing at the moon with the moon itself. The rules, the discipline, the schedule, these are tools, fingers pointing at freedom. But you have become so focused on following the finger perfectly that you have forgotten to look at what it is pointing toward. You have made the form into the goal, and so the form has become a prison." He poured more tea for both of them. "Let me tell you something. In my early years, I practiced exactly as you do now. Rigid discipline, perfect adherence to form, constant measurement of progress. I was the model monk, but I was also miserable, and I was not free. One day, my teacher asked me, "If you are practicing to be free, why are you creating more and more rules for yourself? If you are seeking liberation, why are you building more elaborate prisons?" This question broke something open in me. Ryokan paused, sipping his tea thoughtfully. I began to see that true practice is not about following external forms perfectly. It is about being genuinely present, genuinely awake, genuinely engaged with life as it actually is. Sometimes that means sitting in the meditation hall at the prescribed time. Sometimes that means watching the sunrise from a window. Sometimes that means singing while you sweep. Sometimes that means taking genuine delight in good food. The form changes. What matters is the quality of presence, the depth of awareness, the genuineness of your engagement with this moment. He looked directly at Koji. You follow the rules perfectly, but are you actually present when you sit in meditation? Or are you measuring yourself, judging yourself, congratulating yourself for sitting correctly? You eat mindfully, but do you actually taste your food? Or are you so busy being mindful that you miss the direct experience of eating? You maintain silence during work periods, but is your mind actually quiet? Or is it filled with judgment of those who are not as disciplined as you? Koji felt tears beginning to form. Everything Ryokan was saying was true. He had been so focused on the form of practice that he had missed the point of practice. He had been so busy trying to be a perfect practitioner that he had not actually practiced being present, being awake, being genuinely alive. So what should I do? Koji asked, his voice breaking slightly. Stop trying to be a perfect practitioner, Ryokan said gently. Start being a genuine human being who is committed to waking up. Use the forms when they serve awakening. Let them go when they become obstacles to awakening. Follow the schedule when it supports presence. Deviate from it when presence calls you elsewhere. The rules exist to serve you, not you to serve the rules, he continued. But understand, this is not licensed to be lazy or self-indulgent. This is actually more demanding than rigid rule following, because it requires you to be genuinely present, to listen deeply to each moment, to discern what is actually needed rather than just following a script. When you follow rules rigidly, you do not have to think, do not have to feel, do not have to be truly present. You just follow the form. But when you are committed to genuine practice, you must be awake in every moment, must bring your full awareness to discern what this moment is asking of you. Over the days that Ryokan stayed at the monastery, Koji began to practice this different way. He still sat in meditation at the prescribed times, but he sat with genuine presence rather than with self-congratulation about sitting correctly. He still followed the schedule, but he did so from choice rather than from fear of breaking rules. And sometimes, when the schedule called for one thing but his deep listening called for another, he had the courage to trust his own awareness rather than blindly following form. One morning, he found himself watching the sunrise from the same window where he had first seen Ryokan sitting. He was supposed to be in the meditation hall, but he recognized that in this moment, this sunrise meditation was exactly what was needed. He sat with the dawn light, fully present, and experienced a quality of peace he had never touched in all his years of rigid discipline. Not because watching the sunrise was inherently superior to sitting in the hall, but because he was genuinely present rather than following form out of fear or obligation. Before Ryokan left, Koji thanked him deeply. You have shown me the difference between dead practice and living practice, between following the letter and embodying the spirit, between being a good rule follower and being genuinely awake. Ryokan smiled. You showed this to yourself. I only pointed at what you were ready to see. Remember, the goal is not to abandon discipline. The goal is to find the discipline that comes from presence rather than from fear, from love rather than from obligation, from genuine commitment to awakening rather than from trying to be a good spiritual person. After Ryokan left, Koji's practice transformed completely. He was still dedicated, still committed, still showed up for practice every day. But there was a quality of freedom, of joy, of genuine engagement that had been missing before. Other monks noticed the change. Where once Koji had been rigid and judgmental, now he was warm and accepting. Where once he had measured everyone against an impossible standard, now he met people where they actually were. Where once he had been imprisoned by his own perfectionism, now he moved through his days with a quality of ease and spontaneity that came from being genuinely present rather than performing an idea of what practice should look like. This teaching about the relationship between form and freedom is crucial for anyone walking a spiritual path. Forms and practices and disciplines can be incredibly valuable. They provide structure, create supportive conditions, help us develop new capacities, but they can also become prisons when we make them into ends rather than means, when we follow them rigidly without understanding their purpose, when we use them to avoid the more difficult work of being genuinely present. The question to always ask is this form serving awakening right now, or is it serving my ego's need to be a good practitioner? Is this discipline creating genuine presence, or is it creating rigidity and judgment? The answer will be different in different moments, and discerning the difference requires the very presence that practice is meant to cultivate. As you rest here, notice if there is any way you are being rigid with yourself about how rest should look, about what proper relaxation should feel like, about what you should or should not be experiencing. Can you let go of the form of how rest is supposed to happen and simply be with the actual experience of this moment? Maybe rest looks different than you expected. Maybe it includes some restlessness or some thoughts or some sensations that do not match your idea of perfect peace. Can you meet this moment as it actually is, rather than measuring it against how you think it should be? In a village by the sea, there lived a fisherman named Isamu who had spent his entire life on the water. He knew the ocean intimately, could read the weather in the clouds, understood the patterns of fish and tides. His father had been a fisherman, and his father before him, and Isamu had absorbed their knowledge and added his own through decades of daily engagement with the sea. He was not educated in the conventional sense. He could barely read. He knew nothing of philosophy or religion, but he knew the ocean. One day, a scholar who was studying different forms of wisdom came to the village. He had heard that sometimes the deepest wisdom could be found in the most unexpected places, in people who had never studied formally, but who had given themselves completely to their craft or their relationship with nature. He sought out Isamu, hoping to learn something about the fisherman's way of knowing. Isamu was puzzled by the scholar's brow, interest, but agreed to take him out on his boat. As they moved across the water, the scholar asked many questions. How do you know where to fish? How do you predict the weather? How do you read the water? Isamu answered as best he could, but he found the questions strange. He did not think about how he knew. He simply knew. It was not intellectual knowledge that he could explain in words. It was embodied knowledge, knowledge that lived in his hands and his eyes and his bones. Finally, the scholar asked, "But what is the principle underlying your knowledge? What is the philosophy that guides your relationship with the ocean?" Isamu was quiet for a long time, his weathered hands steady on the rudder, his eyes scanning the water with the ease of long familiarity. Finally, he said, "I do not have a philosophy. I just fish. The ocean teaches me, and I listen. Not with my mind, but with everything. I feel the boat move under me, and I know the current. I smell the air, and I know what weather is coming. I see the birds, and I know where the fish are. This is not thinking. This is just knowing." The scholar pressed further, trying to extract some articulated wisdom he could write down, some principle he could capture. But the more he pressed, the more Isamu retreated into silence. Finally, the fisherman said something that the scholar would remember for the rest of his life. "You want words about the ocean, but the ocean is not words. You want principles about fishing, but fishing is not principles. You want to understand with your mind what I know with my whole being. But some things cannot be understood that way. They can only be lived." He gestured to the vast expanse of water around them, constantly moving, constantly changing, never the same from one moment to the next. The ocean is my teacher. She has taught me that you cannot control life, you can only flow with it. She has taught me that everything changes, and trying to hold on to any moment is like trying to hold water in your hands. She has taught me that there is a wisdom deeper than thinking, a knowing that comes from complete attention, from being fully present to what is actually here. The scholar realized he was in the presence of a different kind of master, someone who embodied wisdom without being able to articulate it in philosophical terms, someone who had achieved through complete engagement with life what scholars sought through analysis and study. Isamu had never heard of Zen, but he lived it perfectly. His relationship with the ocean was the same relationship Zen practitioners sought with all of life: direct, immediate, unmediated by concepts, fully present. "Can you teach me this?" the scholar asked. Isamu laughed, a sound like waves on rocks. "I cannot teach you what I know. I can only show you what I do. You can come with me day after day and fish. Not think about fishing, not analyze fishing, just fish. And maybe, after years of fishing, you will know what I know. But it will not be because I taught you with words. It will be because the ocean taught you by showing you, by moving through you, by making you part of itself." The scholar stayed in the village for 3 months, going out with Isamu almost every day. At first, he tried to observe and analyze, to notice patterns, to formulate principles. But gradually, something shifted. He began to simply be there, feeling the boat move, watching the light on the water, sensing the subtle changes that indicated where fish might be. He stopped trying to understand and started to directly experience. His mind, so accustomed to analyzing everything, slowly learned to be quiet and simply receive. One morning, he found himself knowing, without thought, where they should fish. He could not have explained how he knew. He just knew. And when Isamu followed his intuition and they found fish exactly where he had sensed they would be, the scholar realized he had touched something Isamu had been pointing to all along. A way of knowing that was deeper than thinking, more reliable than analysis, more alive than any principle captured in words. When the scholar finally returned to the city, his colleagues asked what he had learned. He tried to explain but found himself in the same position Isamu had been in. The knowing he had touched could not be adequately conveyed in words. He could only say, "There is a wisdom that comes from complete presence, from giving yourself fully to life rather than standing apart and analyzing it. This wisdom is not inferior to intellectual understanding. It is deeper, and it cannot be learned from books or lectures. It can only be discovered through direct engagement, through being fully here, fully present, fully alive to each moment." This teaching about direct experience versus intellectual understanding appears again and again in Zen. The Buddha himself said that his teachings were like a finger pointing at the moon, useful for directing attention, but not to be mistaken for the moon itself. We can read every text, study every teaching, understand every concept, and still miss the direct experience of awakening because we are too busy analyzing the finger to look at where it is pointing. True wisdom comes not from accumulating knowledge about life, but from being completely present to life as it unfolds moment by moment. This is what Isamu knew through his relationship with the ocean. This is what the scholar began to touch when he stopped trying to understand fishing and simply fished. This is what every Zen master points to when they emphasize practice over philosophy, presence over analysis, being over thinking about being. As you rest here breathing, can you notice the difference between thinking about breathing and actually breathing? Between the concept of rest and the direct experience of rest? Your mind may want to analyze, to understand, to figure out if you are doing this right. But beneath that thinking mind is the direct experience of being alive right now, breathing, sensing, aware. This direct experience is not something to understand, it is something to be. Let your awareness settle into the direct experience, beneath all the thinking about experience. In a monastery deep in the mountains, there was a monk named Shinran who had been practicing for many years. He was dedicated and sincere, but he carried a burden that grew heavier with each passing year. He had done things in his past that he deeply regretted. Before coming to the monastery, he had caused harm through his words and actions. He had been selfish, cruel at times, thoughtless in ways that had hurt people he cared about. These memories haunted him. Even after years of practice, years of sitting meditation, years of studying the teachings, he could not forgive himself. Every time he sat in meditation, the memories would arise, and with them came waves of shame and self-hatred so intense they felt like physical pain. Shinran's teacher was a woman named Eshun, who had practiced for over 40 years. She was known for her directness, her lack of sentimentality, and her ability to see through the stories people told themselves. One day, after Shinran had confessed for perhaps the 100th time his inability to forgive himself, his continued torment over his past actions, Eshun did something unexpected. She took him to the monastery garden where there was a small pond. "Look into the water," she instructed. "What do you see?" Shinran looked and saw his own reflection looking back at him. "I see myself. Now, throw this stone into the water," she said, handing him a large rock. It splashed into the pond, and his reflection shattered into 1,000 ripples, distorting beyond recognition. They stood together, watching as gradually, slowly, the ripples settled and the water became still again. His reflection reformed, clear and undistorted, as if the stone had never been thrown. "The stone is your past actions," Eshun said quietly. "They created ripples, disturbed the surface, changed things, but the water's nature is to return to stillness. The disturbance was real, but it was not permanent. It passed. The water did not hold on to the disturbance. It did not keep replaying the splash over and over. It simply returned to its nature, which is clarity and stillness." She turned to look at Shinran directly. "But you are like someone who keeps throwing the same stone into the pond again and again, through memory, through rumination, through your refusal to let the past be past. The original action happened years ago. The ripples from that action have long since settled. But you create new ripples every day by mentally replaying what happened, by punishing yourself endlessly, by refusing to allow the water of your consciousness to return to its natural stillness." Shinran felt defensive. "But I caused real harm. People suffered because of what I did. How can I just let that go? Isn't that irresponsible? Doesn't forgetting mean I have not learned that I might do the same things again?" Eshun shook her head. "I am not asking you to forget. I am asking you to stop recreating the harm in the present moment through your self-punishment. The people you hurt, they have moved on with their lives. The circumstances that led to those actions have changed. The person you were then is not the person sitting here now. Everything has changed except your grip on guilt, your insistence on continuing to punish yourself." She sat on a bench near the pond, gesturing for him to join her. "Tell me, Shinran, what good does your guilt accomplish? Does it help the people you hurt? Does it undo what happened? Does it make you a better person? Or does it make you so consumed with self-hatred that you are less present, less kind, less available to actually be helpful in the present moment?" Shinran had to admit that his guilt accomplished nothing positive. If anything, it made him worse, more self-absorbed, more withdrawn, less able to genuinely connect with others because he was always lost in his own shame. "The Buddha taught about karma," Eshun continued. "Actions have consequences. What you did had consequences, and you experienced those consequences. You lost relationships. You lost respect. You experienced the natural results of your actions. But karma is not an eternal punishment. It is cause and effect. The cause has occurred. The immediate effects have unfolded. But you are creating new karma right now through how you relate to your past. You are creating suffering for yourself in the present moment, and that suffering radiates out to affect others around you." She paused, letting this sink in. True responsibility for past harm is not endless self-punishment. True responsibility is learning from what happened, making amends where possible, and most importantly, becoming someone who does not repeat those patterns. You cannot do any of these things effectively while you are drowning in self-hatred. Self-hatred does not lead to growth. It leads to paralysis. Shinran felt something beginning to shift in him, like ice starting to crack. But how do I forgive myself? I do not know how. I have tried, but the guilt comes back. You do not forgive yourself through an act of will, Eshun replied. You forgive yourself by recognizing the truth. The truth is that the person who did those things was doing the best they could with the understanding they had at the time. They were suffering, confused, acting from ignorance and pain. This does not excuse the actions, but it explains them. And crucially, that person no longer exists. You are not the same person you were then. Every cell in your body has been replaced. Your understanding has deepened. Your awareness has expanded. You are literally a different being. She continued, what you are doing is identifying with that past person, taking on their guilt as if it were happening now, as if you were still that person making those choices. But you are not. You have changed. The water has returned to stillness. Only your thinking keeps throwing the stone again and again. Eshun stood and walked to the edge of the pond. She picked up another stone and held it. Watch this, she said. She tossed the stone gently into the water. Again, ripples spread across the surface, disturbing the reflection. Now, she said, try to stop the ripples through force of will. Try to make the water still again through your effort. Shinran understood the point immediately. It was impossible. The ripples would settle in their own time. According to the water's nature, no amount of effort could force them to stop. This is what you have been trying to do, Eshun said. Force yourself to be at peace through sheer will, through endless self-punishment, through trying to prove you are sorry enough. But peace does not come through force. It comes through allowing, through letting the ripples settle naturally, through stopping the behavior that keeps creating new disturbance. She looked at him with infinite compassion. The behavior that keeps creating disturbance is not your past actions. Those are done. The behavior creating disturbance now is your refusal to let those actions be in the past, your insistence on keeping them alive through constant rumination, your belief that you must suffer forever to somehow make amends. This is the stone you keep throwing. This is what prevents the water from returning to stillness. Over the following weeks and months, Shinran practiced what Eshun had taught him. When memories of past actions arose, he practiced not feeding them with the energy of self-hatred. He would acknowledge, yes, this happened. Yes, I caused harm. Yes, I regret this deeply. But then, instead of spiraling into endless self-punishment, he would gently return his attention to the present moment. What was needed now? How could he be helpful now? What was the most compassionate action to take in this moment? He found that when he stopped throwing stones through rumination, the water of his mind began to settle. The guilt did not disappear overnight, but it gradually lost its grip on him. He could remember past actions without being destroyed by them. He could learn from what had happened without being imprisoned by it. And most importantly, he became genuinely more kind, more present, more helpful to others, because he was no longer so consumed with his own guilt that he had no energy for anyone else. One day, years later, someone who had been harmed by Shinran's past actions came to the monastery. Shinran felt the old guilt rising, the impulse to grovel, to punish himself, to somehow prove through his suffering that he was sorry. But instead, he simply met the person with presence and honesty. He acknowledged what he had done. He expressed genuine remorse. He listened to how his actions had affected them, and then he showed them who he had become, not through words about how much he had changed, but through the quality of his presence, his genuine care, his ability to be fully there without the distortion of guilt. The person said something unexpected. I can see you have changed. I can feel that you are different. If you were still caught in guilt and self-hatred, I do not think I could have forgiven you. But I can forgive the person you have become, because I can see you have done the work of actually transforming. You are not just sorry, you are different. This teaching about self-forgiveness and working with guilt is crucial for finding peace. So many of us carry burdens from the past, things we regret, harm we caused, mistakes we made, and we believe that endless self-punishment is somehow noble, somehow proves we are good people who take responsibility. But the Buddha taught that all beings deserve compassion, including ourselves. True responsibility for past harm is not self-hatred. It is honest acknowledgement, genuine remorse, making amends where possible, and most importantly, transforming ourselves so we do not repeat the patterns. We cannot do this transformation work effectively while we are drowning in guilt. Self-compassion is not letting ourselves off the hook. It is the foundation from which real change becomes possible. As you rest here, is there something from your past that you have been carrying? Some guilt or regret that keeps you from peace? Can you practice what Eshun taught? Acknowledge that it happened, acknowledge any harm caused, and then practice letting the water settle. Not through force, not through demanding you feel differently, but simply by stopping the behavior of replaying it, by stopping throwing the stone again and again. The past is past, you cannot change it, but you can free yourself from being imprisoned by it. There was an old Zen master named Bankei who lived very simply and taught in a direct, unadorned way. He did not use complex philosophy or traditional koans. He simply pointed people toward what he called their unborn Buddha mind, the aware presence that exists before thought, before concepts, before the constructed sense of self. One day, a young man came to Bankei in great distress. "Master, I have an uncontrollable temper. I try to be patient, but the slightest thing sets me off. I have studied the teachings about anger. I know I should not be this way, but I cannot control it. Can you help me?" Bankei looked at him with interest. "This uncontrollable temper sounds fascinating. Show it to me right now." The young man was confused. "I cannot just show it to you. It is not here right now. It only comes when something triggers it." "Ah," Bankei said with a slight smile. "So it is not part of your nature. It is not something you were born with. If it were truly yours, truly part of you, you could show it to me at any time. But you say it only appears sometimes, when triggered by circumstances. This means it is not you. It is something that arises, temporarily, in response to conditions." The young man sat with this, feeling something shift in his understanding. But when it arises, it feels completely real. It feels like me. I become the anger. "Yes," Bankei agreed. "And this is the problem. When anger arises, you identify with it. You make it personal. You say, 'I am angry,' rather than 'anger is present.' You turn a temporary arising of energy into a solid sense of self. But tell me, when the anger passes, where does it go? If it were truly you, if it were your nature, it could not disappear. Yet it does disappear, does it not?" The young man nodded slowly. "Yes, it passes. Sometimes quickly, sometimes it takes longer, but it always eventually passes. So you have this Buddha mind, this awareness that is always present, always here, witnessing everything," Bankei explained. "And into this awareness, various things arise, thoughts, emotions, sensations. Anger is one of these arising phenomena. It appears, it exists for a time, it disappears. But the awareness that knows the anger is here, before anger arises and remains after anger passes. This awareness is what you truly are. It is unborn, meaning it does not come into existence and go out of existence like anger does. It is always here." He leaned forward slightly. "Your problem is not the anger itself. Anger will arise when conditions for anger are present. This is natural. Your problem is that you identify with the anger. You become the anger. You lose touch with the awareness that is larger than any emotion. When you remember that you are the awareness, not the emotion, something remarkable happens. You can feel anger without being controlled by anger. You can experience the sensation and energy of anger without acting from anger, without being lost in anger. The young man struggled to grasp this. But how do I remember that I am awareness when anger is so overwhelming? Practice, Bankei said simply. Right now, when anger is not present, notice the awareness that is here. Notice that you are aware of your body, aware of my words, aware of this room, aware of thoughts as they arise. This awareness is always here. It is here when you are angry, but you forget it because you become identified with the anger. So practice noticing awareness now, again and again, when things are calm. Then, when anger arises, you will have practiced remembering, there is anger arising in awareness. I am the awareness, not the anger. Over the following months, the young man practiced this teaching. It was not easy. His old habit of identifying with anger was strong, but gradually he began to catch himself. In moments when anger arose, he could sometimes remember, this is anger arising. I am the awareness noticing anger. And in that remembering, something shifted. The anger might still be present, but he was no longer completely consumed by it. There was space around it. He could feel it without being it. One day, he returned to thank Bankei. The anger still arises, he said, but it no longer controls me the way it did. I can feel it without becoming it. This has changed everything. Bankei smiled. You have discovered your unborn Buddha mind. Now, continue to rest in this awareness, not just with anger, but with all experiences. Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, all arise and pass in awareness. But awareness itself never changes, never suffers, is always at peace. This is what you truly are. This teaching about awareness versus content of awareness is one of the most liberating teachings in Zen. We identify with our thoughts, our emotions, our stories about ourselves, and we suffer because these things are constantly changing, constantly disappointing us, constantly beyond our control. But the awareness that knows all these things, that witnesses thoughts and emotions and sensations, this awareness is stable, unchanging, inherently peaceful. When we rest in awareness rather than being lost in content, we find a peace that cannot be disturbed by changing circumstances. As you lie here breathing, can you notice the awareness that is aware of everything else? The awareness that knows you are breathing, that knows there are sensations in your body, that knows thoughts are arising? This awareness is not one more thing you have. It is what you are. Rest in this awareness. Let it be the ground of your experience. Everything else, thoughts, feelings, sensations, arises and passes within this awareness, like clouds passing through the sky. The sky is never disturbed by the clouds. Rest in the sky of awareness. There once lived a wealthy merchant named Hideaki, who had everything the world considered success. He had built a prosperous business, accumulated significant wealth, earned the respect of his community. He had a beautiful home, a loving family, servants to attend to his needs. By all external measures, he should have been happy. But Hideaki was not happy. He felt a persistent emptiness, a sense that something essential was missing, even though he could not name what it was. One day, he heard about a Zen master who lived in extreme simplicity in a small hermitage in the mountains. The master owned almost nothing, lived on simple food, spent his days in meditation and tending a small garden. Yet people who met him spoke of a quality of peace and contentment that was palpable, a sense of completeness that had nothing to do with possessions or status. Hideaki decided to visit this master, bringing expensive gifts as offerings. When he arrived at the hermitage, he was shocked by how little the master had. One room, one bowl, one robe, a sleeping mat, nothing else. The master, whose name was Muso, greeted him warmly and invited him to sit. Hideaki presented his gifts, fine cloth, exotic foods, coins. Muso accepted them with gratitude but set them aside without much interest. They sat together in silence for some time, and Hideaki found himself becoming increasingly uncomfortable. He was used to filling silence with conversation, with business, with activity. This simple sitting felt unbearable. Finally, Hideaki spoke. "Master Muso, I have come seeking your wisdom. I have everything a man could want: wealth, status, comfort, family, and yet I feel empty. I thought that achieving success would bring happiness, but it has not. I am more anxious now than when I was poor and struggling. I worry constantly about losing what I have, about whether I have enough, about whether I am truly successful. Can you help me find the peace that I lack?" Muso was quiet for a long moment, then asked simply, "What are you?" Hideaki was confused by the question. "I am a merchant. I am a husband and father. I am a successful businessman." "No," Muso said gently. "Those are roles you play, things you do, identities you have constructed. But what are you beneath all of that?" Hideaki tried to think of a better answer, but found he could not. He had defined himself entirely through his roles, his accomplishments, his possessions. When he tried to find himself beneath these things, there was a kind of terrifying emptiness. "I do not know," he finally admitted. "This not knowing is the beginning of wisdom," Muso said. "You have spent your whole life accumulating things, building an identity, trying to create security through external means. But none of it has brought the peace you seek, because you are looking in the wrong place. You are trying to fill an inner emptiness with outer things. It cannot work." He gestured to the small hermitage around them. "I own almost nothing, yet I am content. Not because poverty is better than wealth, but because my contentment does not depend on what I have or do not have. It depends on understanding what I am beneath all the having and not having. When you discover your true nature, the nature that exists before you acquired any possessions or achievements or identities, you find a completeness that needs nothing added to it." Hideaki felt defensive. "But surely having resources is better than not having them. Surely comfort is better than deprivation. Are you saying wealth is bad?" "I am not saying wealth is bad," Muso replied. "I am saying that making your peace depend on wealth or on anything external is suffering. You can have wealth or not have wealth, have success or not have success, have comfort or not have comfort. But your fundamental okayness, your inherent completeness, this does not change based on what you have. It is always here, but you have covered it over with layers of seeking, acquiring, accumulating." He poured tea for both of them, the simple act done with complete presence. "You came here bringing gifts, trying even here to establish yourself through giving, through display of wealth. But the greatest gift you could receive is not something I can give you. It is the recognition of what you already are, what you have always been, beneath all the accumulation and achievement." Hideaki stayed with Muso for 3 days. The master did not give him complex teachings or philosophical explanations. He simply invited Hideaki to be present to the life that was actually here. Simple activities like drawing water, preparing food, sitting in silence, walking in the garden. Activities that had no purpose beyond themselves, no goal to achieve, no status to establish. At first, Hideaki found this incredibly difficult. His mind constantly wanted to be somewhere else, doing something more important, making progress towards some goal. But Muso would gently bring him back. "You are drawing water. Just draw water. You are sitting. Just sit. You are walking. Just walk. Stop trying to get somewhere. Be where you are." On the 3rd day, something shifted. Hideaki was sitting in the garden, simply watching the play of light on leaves, and he experienced a moment of complete presence. No thoughts about his business, no worries about the future, no rehearsing of the past, no sense of needing to be anywhere else or anyone else. Just this, just being here, aware, alive, and in that moment, he touched something he had been seeking through all his accumulation, a sense of fundamental okayness that did not depend on anything external. It only lasted a few moments before his thinking mind returned, but it was enough. He had glimpsed what Muso was pointing to, a peace that was not dependent on circumstances, a completeness that existed before and beneath all his acquisitions and achievements. When Hideaki prepared to leave, Muso walked with him to the road. "Will you give up your wealth, your business, your comfortable life?" Muso asked. Hideaki considered. "I do not know if I am ready for that." Muso smiled. "I am not asking you to give anything up. I am asking you to stop depending on these things for your sense of being okay. You can have wealth or not have wealth. You can have success or not have success. But know that your fundamental nature is complete regardless. When you know this, really know it, then you can engage with the world of having and doing without being enslaved by it. You can enjoy success without clinging to it. You can face loss without being destroyed by it. You can live fully in the world while resting in the completeness that needs nothing from the world." Hideaki returned to his life, but something fundamental had changed. He still ran his business, still took care of his family, still enjoyed the comforts his wealth provided. But he was no longer imprisoned by them. When business went well, he appreciated it without clinging to the success. When challenges arose, he met them without being destroyed by the difficulty. He had discovered something beneath all the surface activities of his life. A ground of being that was always okay, always complete, always at peace regardless of circumstances. Years later, when asked about the visit that changed his life, Hideaki would say, "I went to the mountains seeking some secret teaching that would make me happy. What I discovered was that I had been happy all along, beneath all my seeking. I had been complete all along, beneath all my accumulating. I had been at peace all along, beneath all my anxiety. The Master did not give me something I lacked. He pointed me toward what I had always been but had covered over with endless seeking." This teaching about inherent completeness versus the endless seeking of external validation is at the heart of Zen practice. We believe we will be okay when we achieve this or acquire that, when we finally become successful enough, or loved enough, or accomplished enough. But this belief keeps peace always in the future, always conditional on circumstances being right. Zen points to a completeness that exists right now, that has always existed, that does not depend on anything external. When we touch this completeness, we can engage fully with life, working, loving, creating, enjoying, but we do it from fullness rather than from lack, from contentment rather than from desperate seeking. As you rest here, can you sense into the possibility that you are already complete, already okay, already enough? Not because you have achieved anything or acquired anything, but simply because you exist, because you are aware, because consciousness experiences itself through your particular form. Nothing needs to be added to make you okay. You are already okay, right here, right now. This moment, exactly as it is, with you exactly as you are, is complete. Rest in this completeness. In a small temple, there was a young nun named Etsuko who was struggling with meditation. She would sit on her cushion, trying desperately to concentrate, but her mind was constantly wandering. Thoughts about her family, memories from her past, plans for the future, judgments about her practice, worries about whether she was doing it right. The stream of thoughts seemed endless. She felt like a failure as a practitioner, especially when she looked around the meditation hall and saw others sitting in apparent stillness while she was drowning in mental chaos. One day, in desperation, she approached her teacher, an old nun named Kaun who had practiced for over 50 years. "Teacher, I cannot meditate. My mind never stops. I have tried everything, counting breaths, watching thoughts, repeating mantras, but nothing works. My mind is too wild, too undisciplined. Perhaps I am not suited for this practice." Kaun looked at her with gentle eyes and asked, "Who is noticing that your mind is wandering?" Etsuko paused, confused by the question. "I am noticing it. And this I that is noticing the wandering mind. Is it wandering? Kaun asked. Etsuko had to think about this. When she noticed her mind had wandered, there was a moment of clear awareness, a moment of knowing, I am lost in thought. That awareness itself was not lost in thought. It was clear, present, awake. No, she said slowly. The awareness that notices the wandering is not wandering. Kaun nodded. This is the key you have been missing. You have been trying to control your thoughts, to make your mind stop wandering, believing that successful meditation means having no thoughts. But this is not meditation. This is warfare with yourself. True meditation is not about controlling thoughts. It is about recognizing the awareness that is always present, always here, whether thoughts are arising or not. She continued, your thoughts come and go like clouds in the sky. Sometimes there are many clouds, sometimes few, sometimes none. But the sky itself is never disturbed by the clouds. It does not try to push clouds away. It does not prefer clear weather to cloudy weather. It simply is, vast and open, allowing whatever weather appears. Your awareness is like the sky. Thoughts are like clouds. You have been identifying with the clouds, believing you are the thoughts, but you are the sky. Etsuko felt something shifting in her understanding. So when I notice my mind has wandered, instead of judging myself or trying harder to concentrate, I should just recognize the awareness that is doing the noticing. Yes, Kun replied. And more than that, recognize that this awareness is always here. Even when you are completely lost in thought, awareness is present. Otherwise, you could not eventually notice you were lost and return to your breath. Even in the midst of the wildest mental storm, awareness is here, like the sky that remains even when completely covered by clouds. She paused, letting this teaching settle. When you sit in meditation, do not try to control thoughts. This is exhausting and ultimately futile. Instead, rest in awareness. Notice thoughts arising, notice them passing, but do not become them. Do not add the thought, I should not be thinking, to the thoughts that are already present. Simply be the awareness that knows thoughts are happening, the same way the sky knows clouds are present without being disturbed by them. In the days that followed, Etsuko practiced this new understanding. At first, it was subtle. She would sit and thoughts would arise, but instead of immediately trying to push them away or judging herself for having them, she would recognize, thought is happening. Awareness knows this. Sometimes she would get lost in thoughts for long stretches, but when she noticed, instead of criticizing herself, she would simply acknowledge, lost in thought. Awareness is here, noticing this. Gradually, something profound began to happen. Her meditation transformed from a struggle to control thoughts into a resting in awareness. She discovered that awareness was always peaceful, even when thoughts were chaotic. She discovered that she did not need to have a quiet mind to meditate successfully. She only needed to recognize the awareness that was present, regardless of what the mind was doing. One day, several months into this practice, Etsuko was sitting in meditation when a particularly intense storm of thoughts arose. Memories, emotions, plans, worries, everything seemed to be churning at once. The old Etsuko would have panicked, would have tried desperately to control the storm, would have judged herself harshly for failing at meditation. But this time, she simply rested in the awareness that knew the storm was happening. And in that resting, something extraordinary occurred. She saw clearly that awareness was completely untouched by the storm. No matter how intense the thoughts were, awareness remained spacious, peaceful, clear. The storm was happening in awareness, but awareness itself was like vast space that could hold any weather without being disturbed by it. When the meditation period ended, Etsuko went to find Kun. I understand now, she said, her eyes bright. I was trying to clear the sky of clouds, not realizing I am the sky. The sky does not need to be empty of clouds to be the sky. Awareness does not need to be empty of thoughts to be awareness. Kaun smiled warmly. Yes, and now you have discovered something essential. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are not even your sense of being a separate self. You are the awareness in which all of these things appear and disappear. This awareness is your true nature. It has never been born and will never die. It cannot be improved or damaged. It is already completely perfect, completely whole, completely at peace. Etsuko's practice continued to deepen from that point forward. She no longer judged herself for having thoughts during meditation. She no longer believed that she was failing when her mind wandered. She simply rested in awareness, again and again, and discovered that this awareness was always available, always peaceful, always here. Her entire relationship with meditation changed from a struggle to an effortless resting in what she already was. This teaching about resting in awareness, rather than trying to control thoughts, is perhaps the most liberating teaching for anyone who has struggled with meditation. So many people believe they are bad at meditation because they have thoughts, because their mind wanders, because they cannot achieve some imagined state of perfect concentration. But these beliefs are based on a misunderstanding of what meditation is. Meditation is not about controlling your experience. It is about recognizing the awareness that knows all experience. This awareness is always here. It does not need to be created or achieved. It only needs to be recognized. As you lie here breathing, as thoughts arise and pass, as your mind perhaps wanders to the day behind you or the day ahead, can you notice the awareness that knows all of this? This awareness is not disturbed by thoughts. It is not made anxious by planning. It is not made restless by reviewing the past. It simply is, vast and spacious and inherently peaceful. You do not need to clear your mind to rest in this awareness. You only need to recognize it. And in recognizing it, you discover that peace was here all along, not as something to achieve, but as what you already are. There was an old monk named Sengai who was famous for his calligraphy and painting. People would come from great distances to acquire his artwork, but Sengai had an unusual practice. When someone commissioned a piece, he would create it with complete attention and care. But once it was finished and handed to the commissioner, he would completely let go of it. He did not worry about whether they liked it. He did not concern himself with what they did with it. He did not seek recognition or praise. The moment it left his hands, it was no longer his concern. One day, a wealthy collector commissioned a scroll from Sengai. The monk created a beautiful piece of calligraphy, his brushstrokes flowing with the ease that comes from decades of practice. When the collector came to receive it, he examined it carefully and then said with disappointment, "The work is good, but I was hoping for something more extraordinary, something that would be your masterpiece." Other monks standing nearby bristled at this criticism. Sengai was a revered master, and this collector was being disrespectful. But Sengai simply smiled and said, "Then this is not the piece for you. Let me create another." He took back the scroll without any sign of hurt or anger and created a second piece. The collector examined this one and again expressed dissatisfaction. "It is good, but still not what I hoped for." Sengai again showed no reaction, simply accepting the scroll back and creating a third piece. This pattern continued 5 more times, with the collector rejecting each piece and Sengai peacefully creating another. The other monks were becoming increasingly upset on their master's behalf, but Sengai remained completely unaffected, treating each creation with the same care and attention, receiving each rejection with the same equanimity. Finally, on the 8th attempt, the collector accepted the scroll, though even then he seemed only moderately pleased. He paid and left. One of the younger monks immediately approached Sengai, barely containing his frustration. "Master, how could you remain so calm? That man was insulting your work, showing such disrespect. Did it not anger you? Did it not hurt?" Sengai looked at the young monk with gentle amusement. "Why would I be angry or hurt? I created each piece with full attention, offering my best effort in each moment. Once I handed it to him, it was no longer mine. What he thought of it, whether he accepted it or rejected it, praised it or criticized it. None of this has anything to do with me. I cannot control his preferences, his expectations, his judgments. I can only control the care and presence I bring to my work. He began preparing tea, his movements unhurried and graceful. You are suffering on my behalf, but I am not suffering. This is because you have attached your sense of worth to external validation, to others' opinions, to outcomes you cannot control. You believe that criticism means something about your value, but criticism is just someone else's opinion, arising from their particular preferences and conditioning. It has nothing to do with your fundamental worth. Another monk asked, "But Master, did it not bother you at all to have your work rejected repeatedly? Did you not feel even a little hurt?" Sengai considered this. "When I was younger, yes, such things would have bothered me greatly. I measured myself by others' reactions. Their praise made me feel good about myself. Their criticism made me feel worthless. I was on an exhausting roller coaster, my sense of self rising and falling based on external responses I could not control. But I came to see that this was suffering I was creating through attachment to outcomes." He poured tea for the gathered monks. "Now, I create because creation itself brings me joy. I put care and attention into my work because this is how I choose to be, not because I am seeking validation. When someone appreciates my work, I am grateful, but their appreciation does not make me more valuable. When someone criticizes my work, I listen to see if there is something useful to learn, but their criticism does not make me less valuable. My worth is not on the negotiating table. It is inherent, unchanging, not dependent on anyone's opinion." One of the monks pressed further, "But surely you prefer praise to criticism, acceptance to rejection?" "Of course," Sengai laughed. "I am human. Praise feels pleasant, criticism can sting, but I do not build my peace on these temporary feelings. I know that both praise and criticism are like weather, they come and go, and neither one tells me anything fundamental about my worth. So yes, I notice preferences, but I am not enslaved by them. I can feel disappointment without being destroyed by it. I can receive criticism without collapsing into self-doubt." He gestured out the window to where rain was beginning to fall. "Look at the rain. Does it fall differently on the garden of someone who welcomes it versus someone who resents it? No. The rain simply falls according to its nature, indifferent to how it is received. My work is like this. I create according to my nature, with care and attention. How others receive it is their business, not mine. I cannot control their reception, and I do not need to." The monks sat in silence, absorbing this teaching. Finally, Sengai added something more. "The deepest teaching here is this. When you stop seeking validation from others, when you stop making your worth dependent on external responses, you become free to truly serve others." That wealthy collector left here today with a scroll he accepted, even if reluctantly. But more importantly, he encountered someone who was not trying to manipulate his opinion, not trying to prove anything, not needing his approval. Perhaps he felt something in that encounter that was more valuable than any scroll, the possibility of being okay, regardless of others' judgments. This teaching about non-attachment to outcomes and validation is essential for peace. We spend enormous energy trying to control what others think of us, seeking praise, avoiding criticism, measuring our worth by external responses. But this makes our peace entirely dependent on factors we cannot control. Other people will have their opinions based on their own conditioning, their own preferences, their own projections. We cannot control this, and we do not need to. Our worth is not determined by anyone's opinion. It is inherent. When we truly understand this, we become free to create, to express, to serve, to live fully without the exhausting burden of needing everyone to validate us. As you rest here, can you feel what it would be like to let go of needing to be seen a certain way, needing to prove yourself, needing others to recognize your worth? Your worth is not up for debate. It exists independent of anyone's opinion, including your own. You can rest in this inherent worth, this fundamental okayness that needs no validation from anyone. This is true freedom. And now, as we near the end of our journey together through these Zen tales, let us rest in the simplest truth of all. You are here. You are breathing. You are aware. This simple fact of being alive, of consciousness experiencing itself through your particular form, this is the miracle. Not a miracle you must achieve or earn, but a miracle that is already happening, has always been happening, will continue happening regardless of what you do or do not do. All these stories we have heard tonight, Kenzo, learning to stop seeking enlightenment, Ren discovering that wisdom is lived, not just understood, Takashi learning to be with anger without being controlled by it, Hideo finding value beyond perfection, Isamu knowing through direct experience rather than concepts, Shinran learning to forgive himself, Hideaki discovering completeness beneath all seeking, Etsuko recognizing awareness as her true nature, Sengai resting in inherent worth. All of them were discovering the same truth expressed in different ways. The truth is that peace is not somewhere else, not in some future moment when you finally get everything right. Peace is here, now, available in this very moment when you stop fighting with reality, when you stop demanding that you be different, when you stop seeking what you already have. This is what all the Zen masters throughout history have been pointing to with their strange stories, their paradoxical koans, their simple actions done with complete presence. They are pointing to the moon, and the moon is just this being here, being now, being aware. Let your body continue to settle. Feel how you are supported by the surface beneath you. Feel how breathing happens by itself, without any effort from you. Feel how awareness is here, knowing all of this, requiring nothing from you except the simple recognition that it is present. Do anything to be aware. Awareness is what you are. It is always here, like the sky behind the clouds, like the ocean beneath the waves, like the silence beneath all sounds. There is nowhere you need to get to. There is nothing you need to figure out tonight. There is no problem you need to solve before you can rest. All of that can wait. Right now, in this moment, your only job is to be here, breathing, allowing, resting in the simple truth of your own aware presence. Everything else, all the stories, all the seeking, all the struggles can be set down, just for now, just for this night. The Zen tradition speaks of sudden enlightenment and gradual cultivation. Some people have dramatic moments of awakening where everything shifts in an instant. But most people walk the path gradually, with small shifts in understanding, with incremental changes in how they meet life, with slow releasing of old patterns and slow embodying of new ways of being. Both paths are valid. Both paths lead to the same place, and that place is not actually somewhere else. It is a different way of being right here, right now. You have heard many teachings tonight. Some may have resonated deeply. Others may have passed through without leaving much trace. This is perfectly fine. The teachings that are meant for you will settle in their own time, will bear fruit when the conditions are right. You do not need to try to remember everything, do not need to analyze, or understand, or integrate all at once. The teachings are seeds planted. Some will sprout quickly. Others will lie dormant and sprout when the season is right. Trust this process. What matters most is not which specific teachings you remember, but the overall invitation these teachings are offering. To be more present, more accepting, more gentle with yourself and others, more willing to let go of what cannot be held, more able to rest in the awareness that is your deepest nature. This invitation is always here, always available, in every moment. You can return to it again and again, whenever you remember, whenever you need it. As your breath continues its natural rhythm, as your body grows heavier and more relaxed, as the boundary between waking and sleeping begins to blur, let yourself feel held by something larger than your individual self. The ancient lineage of practitioners who have walked this path before you, the vast web of beings walking it now, the countless beings who will walk it in the future, You are part of this unbroken stream of those seeking truth, seeking peace, seeking to wake up to what is already here. You are not alone in this. You have never been alone. Even in your most isolated moments, you have been part of this greater whole, connected to all beings through the shared ground of awareness, through the shared experience of being alive, through the shared longing for peace and freedom and love. This connection is not something you must create. It already exists. You need only recognize it. The Buddha's last words were, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. Everything changes, everything passes. This body will age and eventually die. This particular configuration of consciousness that you call yourself will dissolve back into the greater whole from which it emerged. But the awareness that looks through your eyes, the consciousness that experiences this moment, this is not personal. It does not belong to you. You belong to it, and it is eternal, unborn, undying, beyond all coming and going. It requires only that you notice what is actually here when you look closely at your experience. Strip away all concepts, all beliefs, all ideas about who you are and what you should be, and what remains. Simply this, simply being, simply awareness aware of being aware. This is your true nature. This is what you have always been. This is what you will always be. Let sleep come if it comes. Let wakefulness remain if it remains. Both are fine. Both are part of the natural rhythm of being alive. You do not need to force anything. Do not need to make anything happen. Do not need to be anywhere other than exactly where you are. This moment, just as it is complete. You, just as you are complete. Nothing is missing. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be taken away. The night holds you in its dark embrace. The earth beneath you supports your weight without effort, without complaint, without asking anything in return. The air around you offers breath without demanding payment. The awareness in you witnesses everything without judgment, without preference, without needing things to be different than they are. All of this is grace. All of this is gift. All of this is love. If we understand love not as a feeling but as this fundamental allowing, this basic acceptance of what is, rest now in this love, in this fundamental okayness of being alive. Let the stories you have heard tonight fade into the background, their words dissolving like mist in morning sun, leaving only the essence, only the invitation to be here, be now, be at peace. The details do not matter. The names and places and specific teachings do not matter. What matters is that you have spent this time opening to the possibility of peace, opening to the possibility that you are already enough, opening to the possibility that this moment is complete just as it is. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges and opportunities. There will be moments when you forget everything you heard tonight, when you get lost in seeking or striving or struggling. This is part of being human. But now you know that you can return. You can always return to this breath, to this moment, to this awareness. The path is not about never getting lost. The path is about remembering how to find your way back, again and again, with patience and gentleness. Think of yourself with compassion. Think of all you have carried, all you have endured, all the ways you have tried so hard to get it right, to be enough, to find peace. You have been doing your best with the understanding you had. You have been walking your path with whatever light was available to you. There is nothing to judge, nothing to regret. Everything has brought you here, to this moment, to this listening, to this opening. Everything has been perfect in its imperfection, necessary in its difficulty. And now you can rest. You can set down the burden of trying to be someone you are not. You can release the exhaustion of constantly seeking what you already have. You can stop running toward an imagined future and simply be here, in this ordinary, extraordinary moment of being alive. The seeking can stop, the striving can cease. The endless measuring and judging and comparing can fall away. What remains is just this breathing, being, aware. The The Zen masters of old would sometimes give their students a simple instruction. Just sit, just walk, just eat, just be. Not sit to achieve something, not walk to get somewhere, not eat to fuel the body for future tasks. Just do what you are doing with complete attention, complete presence, allowing each action to be complete in itself. This is the practice. This is the path. This is enlightenment, not as some distant goal, but as the simple reality of being fully here, fully engaged with life as it actually is. You have been fully here tonight, listening to these stories, allowing these teachings to touch you. This itself is practice. This itself is meditation. This itself is the path. You do not need to be somewhere else, doing something else, being someone else. This is enough. You are enough. This moment is enough. Let your eyes remain closed if they are closed. Let your body continue its journey towards sleep if that is where it is going. Let your mind wander where it wants to wander without judgment or control. Everything is allowed. Everything is welcome. There is no right way to rest, no correct way to fall asleep, no proper way to be in this moment. However you are, whatever is happening, it is fine. It is perfect. It is exactly what is meant to be happening. The ancient Zen teachers sometimes spoke of falling forward into life, rather than trying to protect yourself from life, to control life, to arrange life perfectly before you are willing to fully engage. This falling forward is trust. It is surrender. It is the recognition that you are held by something much larger than your small sense of self, that you are carried by a river that knows where it is going, even when you do not, that you are part of a vast intelligence that has been guiding your steps all along, even when you thought you were lost. Fall forward now into rest. Fall forward into this night. Fall forward into the not knowing of what comes next, into the uncertainty of whether you will sleep or lie awake, into the mystery of being alive for another breath, another moment, another day. You do not need to know what happens next. You do not need to control how this unfolds. You can simply allow, simply be, simply rest in the arms of this moment that holds you now. Thank you for walking this path with me tonight. Thank you for opening your heart to these ancient teachings, for allowing these stories to touch whatever needed to be touched. Thank you for being here, for listening, for being willing to consider that peace might be simpler than you thought, closer than you imagined, more available than you believed. Your presence here, your attention, your willingness to listen, this is not small. This is the beginning of everything. May you rest deeply tonight. May your dreams be gentle, or may there be no dreams at all, just the vast darkness of deep, restoring sleep. May you wake tomorrow refreshed, remembering something essential even if you cannot put it into words, carrying something precious even if you cannot name it. May you meet tomorrow's moments with more presence, more acceptance, more kindness than you had before. May you remember, even if only briefly, that you are already whole, already complete, already home. Sleep now. Rest. Let go of everything, every thought, every worry, every plan, every story. Let it all dissolve into this moment of simple being. You are safe. You are held. You are loved. You are exactly where you need to be. All is well. All has always been well. Even in difficulty, even in struggle, underneath it all is this fundamental okayness, this basic goodness, this deep peace that nothing can touch because it is the very nature of what you are. Breathe in, breathe out. Let each breath carry you deeper into rest, deeper into peace, deeper into the silence that has been waiting patiently beneath all the noise. The journey continues tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. But right now, there is only this, only now, only breath, only being, only awareness resting in awareness. Consciousness knowing itself, the infinite experiencing itself through your particular, precious, temporary form. Rest well, dear friend. The night is long and welcoming. The darkness is soft and kind. Let yourself be held. Let yourself be carried. Let yourself simply be. Good night.